This program is brought to you by the Stanford Humanities Center. For more information, please visit us at shc.stanford.edu.
Let me start by simply giving you the kind of motivating question behind this book. It's been nagging at me for at least 10 years or so. And very straightforward question. How did we go from the striking bipartisanship and comparative economic equality of the post-World War II period to the deep, even unprecedented economic and political divisions of today? Don't believe me about the nature of those divisions and how unprecedented they are. Let me tease you with a few facts. So on the economic inequality side, we only have really good comparable data for about the last 100 years. By the measure of that data, we are edging back towards the most unequal period we've ever been in economically. Levels that we really haven't seen since what was called the Gilded Age, that is the early decades of the 20th century that we associate with kind of robber barons and unrestrained capitalism. Some people are now referring to that as the first Gilded Age because, frankly, we're living in the second Gilded Age. On the political side, we actually have very good overtime data on political polarization as measured by voting records in Congress, just how far apart the two parties are. And again, we have data for all of American history on that particular measure, and what it tells us is pretty depressing. The House of Representatives has never been more divided in American history. The Senate is as divided as it's ever been. And that includes the run-up to the Civil War, which I've been told was a rather divisive period in American history. Let me give you one other rather depressing statistic. In 1950, 67 Republican House members had more liberal voting records than Democratic House members. At the present, you want to hazard a guess at how many Republicans have more liberal voting records than the most conservative Democrat? That answer would be zip. That's true in the Senate as well. There is not a single Republican member of Congress whose voting record is more liberal than the most conservative Democrat. There is simply no overlap between the two parties. These divisions in the book, we argue that these divisions are worrisome, not simply in and of themselves, but because of the very real threats to American democracy that they've helped spawn. Former President Jimmy Carter, in July of 2013, stunned an audience in Atlanta. He was giving a speech in Atlanta. He stunned the audience by saying, and I quote, "America no longer has a functioning democracy," unquote. I heard this remark a few days after he made it and was really surprised that there wasn't much attention granted that remark at the time. I actually heard a commentator, not associated with Fox News, say, "Well, that's Jimmy Carter. He's a little crazy." Say what? When a former president of the United States from either party says we are no longer a functioning democracy, we best pay attention. So what are these threats to kind of our democratic heritage? We spend the last chapter of the book documenting very carefully and talking about 8 or 9 specific threats to kind of the health and well-being of American democracy. Given time constraints, I will tease you with just one. If I asked you what the average number of enactments coming out of Congress was in the post-war period. Congress, meets in 2-year sessions. So how many enactments were routinely passed in Congress in those post-war years? Now, it's sort of an unfair question in a way. What the hell's an enactment? Do you mean a big consequential piece of legislation? No, not necessarily. It's anything that Congress can agree on. So if next week Congress designated May 15th as National Frisbee Day, that would be an enactment. That might be the only thing they could agree on at this point. So, but I still put the question to you. Just somebody hazard a guess as to how many enactments came out of a 2-year session of Congress, late 40s, 50s, into the 60s? 600. Do I hear more? Do I hear less? That's not a bad guess. It's actually in the range of 1,600, 1,700 enactments, topping out over 2,000 in the early 50s. I forget which session of Congress it was, but over 2,000. Want to guess where we are now? All time, the last 2 sessions of Congress, the lowest number of enactments in U.S. history were in the 260, 270, 280 range. That's 1/6 of where we were. Carter may be guilty of a bit of hyperbole when he says we are no longer a functioning democracy, but it is absolutely clear that we do not have a functioning legislative branch at the federal level at present. And this is at a time when we face unprecedented problems, global warming, international terrorism, and we can't get legislative traction on anything except maybe the Frisbee designation I mentioned earlier. Again, this is only one of 7, 8, 9 specific threats to the health and well-being of American democracy that we talk about in Chapter 8. By the way, that's not the central focus of the book. The central focus, chapters 1 through 7, is a historical account of how we went from the bipartisanship of the post-war period, the comparative economic equality, to the deep divisions of today. But in that last chapter, we talk about these specific threats to our democratic heritage. I'll simply close by saying that these threats pose a real danger to democratic principles and practices. They are serious. We can't assume that just because we began life, that this country began as a democracy, that we are guaranteed to remain one. These are tricky, very dispiriting times, I find. I get the reason we want to turn away from politics. It's so damn depressing. The level of partisan animus and dysfunction is such that we just want to avert our eyes. We can't afford to do it. The stakes have never been higher in my lifetime. We need to do whatever we can, each and every one of us, to restore the health and well-being of American democracy. Only by calling attention to the present threats to our democratic heritage can we hope to begin to reverse them. And that's part of what we're trying to do in this book. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Stanford Humanities Center. For more information, please visit us at shc.stanford.edu.